True success starts in an attitude, and it ends in an action. It comes from belief in oneself and belief in one higher than oneself. However, it comes quickest to the one who combines confidence and determination with energy and enthusiasm. I say these words because they hold truth with me, because it was when I was 7 years old, growing up in Selma, Alabama, when my life was changing without me really even knowing it. Growing up in George Washington Carver projects from a poor family of 8, it was rough. Growing up in the midst of witnessing and experiencing racial discrimination, segregation, violence, tears, and even death of people that I had the opportunity to meet as that little girl, people who had come to Selma to join in that struggle, people who became close to me, and then people that I would see die. People like the late Jonathan Daniels, the late Viola Luiso, the late Reverend James Reeves, the late Hosea Williams, even the late Congressman John Lewis, and of course, I would be remiss without saying the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Both my parents worked in the factories. My dad worked at Cleveland Table Company, and my mother worked at Selma Apparel Sewing Company. They both worked like many other families in George Washington Carver projects, and in even Selma, trying to make it to take care of their families. But let me tell you something. It was when I met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when a chord was really struck with me, when he became a very, very special man to me after having met him. I met Dr. King in front of the now historic Brown Chapel AME Church, which was right next door in the projects. It sat right in the center of George Washington Carver projects. And my best friend and I were playing in front of the church one day, and I would never forget these beautiful cars that had driven up in front of the church. And of course, as little girls, these cars caught our attention, and we started walking towards those cars, and there were these men getting out of the first 2 to 3 cars, and then we saw them circle themselves around this one particular man. This one man had on a nice starchy white shirt, a black tie, black slacks, and there was one man who was assisting him in putting his black suit coat jacket on. And he looked at us and said, "Do you little girls know who this man is?" And of course, we didn't know who any of them were. He said to us, "This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr." And Dr. King immediately started talking to us, asking us the normal questions that adults would ask little girls or little boys. He asked us our names, where did we live, and we pointed our little fingers in the direction of our home. And he and his entourage, as they were making their way to the real Brown Chapel Church on this day to have a strategy meeting, we were just walking with Dr. King as he continued to conversate with us and ask us about school. And as we were walking, or getting ready to walk in that back door, that same man who assisted Dr. King with putting his suit coat jacket on him, he said to us, "You little girls can go on and play now because we're about to have a meeting." And Dr. King suddenly said to him, he took us by our hands and he said, no, let them stay. And he took us on into Brown Chapel Church, into the room in which they would be having the strategy meeting. And he didn't stop there. When we got in that room, he went and got 2 little chairs, and he set those chairs in the rear of that room and asked us to have a seat. And then he would go and get his own chair, and he set his chair right in front of us and continued to talk to us before that meeting would start. I'll never forget this vivid moment of not just meeting Dr. King on that particular day, but when we went into that room and sat down, he asked us a question. He said, what do you little girls want? And my best friend and I looked at each other because we didn't even know how to respond to that question. And Dr. King said to us, when I ask you little girls, what do you want? I want you to say freedom. And the next question that he asked us, he said, now when do you little girls want it? And we looked at each other not knowing how to respond to that question. And Dr. King said to us, when I ask you little girls, when do you want it? I want you to say now. And he repeated those questions and he asked us to say it louder. This was the first time and the most vivid moment that I'll never, ever forget in meeting the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And before that meeting would start, Dr. King said to us, I want to see you little girls before I leave, because we're about to start a movement here. And little did we know about a movement, or even the changes that were about to come to Selma, Alabama. But one thing that I did know, this man became instantly special to me as that little girl. He was so special, I couldn't wait till I get home to tell my parents that I had met this man by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And you know what my daddy said to me? He said, you just better stay from around that mess. And he asked me not to go back to Brown Chapel Church on that day. This is the first day, the first time that I became that disobedient little girl, because I knew that I wanted to see Dr. King again. So I slipped out of my back door. I was in and out of that church because I wanted to see Dr. King before he left Selma after that strategy meeting. And I was able to do that. And after having walked Dr. King and his entourage back to their cars, he said, I will be coming back to Selma. We're going to have a mass meeting, and I want to see you little girls when I come. And of course, many mass meetings took place after that particular day of having met Dr. Martin Luther King. During those mass meetings, I would be there, sitting on the front pew, joining in the singing of the freedom songs and clapping of my hands in the prayers and listening to Dr. Martin Luther King and many others speak. And they talked about how African Americans didn't have the right to vote. And many things would take place after those meetings, many marches that I participated on, being that disobedient child. I had already made up in my mind as that little girl at a young age that I wasn't going to let nobody turn me around. But the most traumatic experience of my life during the 60s as that little girl was my participation on the Bloody Sunday March on the Selma Edmund Pettus Bridge, which was the first attempt for those courageous freedom fighters to march from Selma to Montgomery in an effort to gain their right to vote. I was there, 8 years old. I would never forget that traumatic experience, the Bloody Sunday March, people being beaten, tear gas. The picture of Bloody Sunday has never left my mind, neither my heart. Selma, Lord Selma. So today, there are many things that led me as a result of my participation as a little girl growing up in Selma to the path and the choices that I've made since childhood to present. And one of the things that was the most credible attributes that added to my life as a little girl based upon the many racial barriers and other racial circumstances that I faced from childhood even until I would have graduated from high school and helping to integrate the schools. Regardless of those bad experiences that I incurred and so many others, one of the most physical attributes that I gained as that little girl was character, having good character. And after having gone through those experiences, I was very active, not just in school, not just in church, not just during the civil rights movement, but in my community. And one of the things that Dr. King inspired and motivated me to do as that little girl was to get the best education that I could, even though my parents couldn't even send me to college. They weren't even thinking about that because they couldn't afford to send me to college. They only wanted me to go to school and get a high school diploma. But Dr. King inspired me to do more. Dr. King plucked me from the poverty of Selma and the ignorance of Selma with my knowing that what was instilled in me, if I believe it, I could achieve it. And I was able to attend Tuskegee Institute. And I graduated with honors. During my tenure at Tuskegee Institute as a student, I was still a young activist. I was still motivated and inspired to make a difference on the college campus with my peers. And after leaving Tuskegee Institute, I became active in my community again in Selma and moved to Montgomery, Alabama. And after having moved here in Montgomery, Alabama, I started the Keep Production Youth Development and Modeling Program. And that's a nonprofit program for young people from diverse backgrounds to build self-esteem and self-confidence, for young people to break out of non-productive patterns and become successful leaders. And today, 42 years later, that program is still in existence, and much has blossomed from that. Great leaders, many who have come through that program are professionals and who are doing great things, not just in Montgomery, Alabama, but across this country. After starting Keep Production, I decided, even working with Keep, to be an etiquette coach and teaching our young people about social etiquette, dining etiquette, and dressing etiquette. And even today, that's a great focus at such a time as this. I started the Women of Will organization, which is another organization that I found for women who focuses primarily on youth mentoring, on bringing women together in an effort to do community services in the community and make a difference and to express themselves through their God-given talents and knowing that they can make a difference. They can expand their territory. I could stand here and tell you many things that I have been able to do as a result of my history and my path, with my conscience being pricked at a young age in Selma. But what's most important to me today, as I close, is that we as a community, at such a time as this, challenging times, not just here in Montgomery, Alabama, not just here in the state of Alabama, but all over the world, it's so important for us to embrace our young people in a way that we can expand their voices of hope, their vessels of change, and their instruments of peace and progress. And today, if we are able to continue to walk together, to pray together, to work together as a people, then we can become that beloved community that Dr. King and others fought for. And we would never, ever lose our power of the vote. The vote and our power to vote must continue to be executed. And we must continue to train, educate, and get our young people involved in this process. Thank you so very much.